My friends, we're gathered here today to commend the body of our brother Jesus. We commit his body to its resting place, earth to earth, ashes to ashes, dust to dust. May the Lord bless him and keep him. The Lord's face shine upon him with grace and mercy. May the Lord look upon him with favor and give him peace. In a world so uncomfortable with pain and suffering, in a world so eager and obsessed with pleasure and happiness, in a world where people struggle to offer comfort to others whom they can't fix or make better, in a world where we always, for expediency's sake, say, "I'm fine," when someone asks us how we are, whether that is true or nearly true, or whether it's a bald-faced lie. In a world where we spend so much time on clapping and praise, and we state over and over again, well, everything happens for a reason, but we spend so little time on lament and on grieving. And yes, even in a world that is so looking forward to bunnies and chocolate and egg hunts and lilies just around the corner, let us who are gathered today take a moment, even if it is just a moment, to sit at the foot of the cross of our beloved Lord Jesus. When we toured Israel, one of the more poignant insights that I received was this. We often sing that lovely song, "On a hill far away stood an old rugged cross." But the person who was guiding us through the garden tomb said actually that hymn should say, "On a hill nearby stood an old rugged cross." The crosses, when people were crucified, they were close at hand so that others could stare and look at and walk by and shout at and spit on the people who were hanging there. And for all that we make of the painful nature of crucifixion, and by all means it is a painful way to die, but in our human depravity we have dozens of other painful ways to die, both illnesses that take us and monstrous things that we inflict on one another. But despite that, the Gospels are very matter-of-fact about Jesus' crucifixion, and they spend almost no time describing pain or torture. Luke simply says, when they came to the place called the Skull, there they crucified him, along with the criminals, one on his left, one on his right. So what's important about Jesus being crucified is not necessarily the pain he endured, though that is important. But what's important about Jesus being crucified, of all ways to die, was the fact that it was a humiliating death. There Jesus hung on a cross nearby, where everyone could see him and everyone could react. And that, in fact, was the point of crucifying someone. Jesus is crucified, we read, between two other men, rebels, people who cross the Roman state. This is the fate of people who rebel against Rome. They're hung on a cross, and Jesus shares this fate with them. The Romans wanted to make a point that others could see so that they would fall in line with what was expected of them so they would not suffer the same kind of fate. And so we read in Luke's gospel that the rulers even snared at him, and the soldiers also came up and mocked him. And there was a written notice above him which read, "This is the King of the Jews," and one of the criminals who hung there hurled insults at him. On a hill nearby stood an old rugged cross, the emblem of suffering and shame. And so we will sit at the foot of that cross for a moment, not so far away, but so near that we can almost reach out and touch it. So near that the one hanging on it can hear us and see us, and yes, even in the state he is in, show compassion to us. So let us sit at the foot of the nearby cross for just a moment. Of course, we know what's coming on Sunday, but let us not rush there too quickly. Because those who managed to stay at the foot of the cross in the dark that day did not know what was coming next, even if we think maybe they should have. Let us cultivate the discipline of sitting here with Jesus, who is soon to breathe his last, And let us also sit here with the ones who surround him, looking on. And yes, let us also sit here because there are 11 who should be here who are absent at this time, but are still somewhere feeling the anguish deep in their hearts of Jesus' impending death. Perhaps they're somewhere crushed under the memory of their own failures. Let us sit for a moment with Mary, the mother of Jesus, because she's watching her son die. And let us try to absorb the shock and the pain of that for just a moment. It's been said that no one should have to bury a child, and nearly anyone who's ever done so will agree with that. Mary is seeing the suffering and the death of her firstborn. Mary, who's been visited by an angel even before her son was born, is seeing the death of her hopes for this miraculous son. Where are the angel choirs now? Where are the rich men bringing their gifts to this child? And Mary's not only witnessing the death of her son as if that were not bad enough, but she's also witnessing the death of her Lord, her King. Just as Mary said yes to the angel when he visited her with the news of her impending pregnancy, she said, "May it be to me as you have said." She also said yes to Jesus, even when she thought that he'd gone off the deep end and needed to be reined in. And Jesus had looked her in the eye and said, "My mother and my brothers are those who hear God's words and put it into practice." And from that day forward, Mary said yes again and became one of Jesus' followers who heard God's words from the lips of the child that she had raised, and she put those words into practice. Is this what comes from saying yes to God? We tend to think of obedience to God as something that leads to good things coming our way. It's hard to imagine that the ultimate obedience could lead to the ultimate sacrifice. It's hard to imagine that for Jesus, and it's hard to imagine that for Mary. But let us sit here for a moment with Jesus' mother Mary as the sword that was promised when Jesus as a baby was exclaimed and prophesied over at the temple by two of God's faithful witnesses, as that sword pierces her own soul. Mary watches as the leaders spit on and mock Jesus as her son, her Lord. So let us sit with Mary for a while, even though we cannot do or say anything that will fix what she's going through, and even though we cannot comfort her in her pain. Let us sit here for a moment with the other women whom Jesus called daughters of Jerusalem, who are also here to weep and mourn for Jesus. Other women who may have been some of the women that we met on Palm Sunday, such as the widow who received her son back from the dead at Jesus' hand, or the woman who was healed of bleeding for 12 years, or the woman who was bent double and Jesus healed her on the Sabbath, much to the consternation of the religious leaders. Let us sit here a moment with those women who had been cured of evil spirits and diseases, such as Mary called the Magdalene, Joanna, Susanna, and many others. These women had followed Jesus just as those famous 12 disciples had, and had helped to support Jesus out of their own purses. What does it mean for them to see Jesus hanging there on a cross? They believed so much in him that they gave him and his followers money so that they can continue their ministry out of their own means. They were the ones who'd been touched by Jesus' act of power, and moreover by his compassion and his love. These are the ones whom others had passed by, but Jesus had noticed them. Jesus noticed the widow who had no means of support now that her son was dead, and healed him. Jesus saw the woman who'd suffered for many years, but the religious leaders thought that maybe she could wait to be healed until regulations allowed for it. Jesus sought out the woman who touched him in a crowd and received her healing just so he could call her daughter and tell her that her faith had healed her. Who would notice these women now that Jesus was dying and the hopes that he had generated in them were dying with him? His 12 closest disciples for the most part, are nowhere to be seen, so there's no one left to notice them and to look for them and to find them? What if the power that Jesus had displayed to heal them left them the moment that he also left this world? Or what if they still had their healing, but life didn't have any meaning for them now that Jesus was not here? Just last week, they were shouting statements of praise and worship. They proclaimed this man as their king. And now their king is strung up on a cross. And he tells them, do not weep for me, but weep for yourselves. Because things could and would get much worse. So let us sit here for a moment with these women who followed Jesus, and these women who will go even so far as to perform that last act of love, who were prepared to anoint his body when the time was right. And let us sit here for a moment because 11 of his disciples are not here. Let us stand here in their stead. Because wherever they are at this moment, whether it is cowering in fear that they might be arrested and tried, or weeping bitterly under the weight of their own abandonment and denial of their Lord, or wondering how they're going to go on living in a world where Jesus is gone, how they can go back to what they did before they met him and try and resume their everyday lives, knowing that the colors of the world would be forever dimmer because they lost the one person they truly believed in. Wherever the disciples are at this exact moment, let us sit at the foot of the cross for them. And let us sit here for a moment with the criminal who hangs on the cross beside Jesus. Not so much the one hurling insults at him, though I'm sure that we can learn from that one as well. And we could even probably learn from the leaders and soldiers who mocked and scoffed and abused Jesus as he hung there for all to see. For we know and acknowledge that so often our words and our actions and our lives are the kind of things that mock the kind of life that Jesus wanted from his followers. But let us sit here for a moment with the one who does not mock Jesus. Let us sit here with the one who acknowledges the full weight of his sin. Let us sit here with the one who fears God because he knows that he is hanging there justly, but who also fears God because he knows that Jesus is hanging there as the innocent one who has done nothing wrong. Let us sit here with the one who believes that Jesus is a king of a different kind of kingdom and asks that Jesus see him hanging there beside him and that Jesus would remember him when he comes into that kingdom. This man has the temerity, even while acknowledging his guilt, to ask that he be forgiven, that he could be a follower of Jesus, as unlikely as it would seem. And Jesus, even while he is hanging there, has the time, the energy, the compassion to comfort the one hanging beside him. Today you will be with me in paradise, says Jesus. And today is all this man has left. Indeed, it seems at this moment that this is all that Jesus has left too, and Jesus and this criminal are going to spend it together. So let us sit with the man who knows that he will never get off that cross, but who wants to follow Jesus anyway. And let us sit here with the Centurion. You know, the Roman one of the oppressors, one of the ones who led Jesus to this very spot and supervised the others while this whole ordeal played out. Yes, that one. Because somehow that man saw this whole scene played out, and as he saw those who mocked him and those who grieved, as he saw those who couldn't bring themselves to be there and those who stayed, as he heard Jesus' words of compassion to the one hanging beside him, even as he himself was near death, and as he heard those explosive words, "Father, forgive them, because they don't know what they're doing." Something about this scene convinced this Roman centurion, one of the ones who had done this to Jesus, that Jesus was indeed a righteous and innocent man. Let us stay for a moment with this man as he realized that everything that he had just participated in and supervised was wrong because he'd crucified someone who was innocent. And even if we cannot relieve him of the weight of his regret that he will never have a chance to make it right, let us sit with him as it dawns on him that Jesus really was righteous and innocent. It's from the lips of a Roman military man and a criminal in the Gospel of Luke that we are reminded of this very fact as Jesus hangs on the cross, that he does so as one who does not deserve to be there. And let us stand at the foot of the cross so these people don't have to stand there alone. We who also love Jesus with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength, we stand here with them. And while we might be tempted to ask why does he suffer and die if he's innocent? Why does the will of the Lord lead him into the hands of such a cruel death? Why did God not allow this cup to pass from his lips? Why do bad things happen to good and to innocent people? Why do mothers have to bury their children? Why do evil people get elected or appointed or inherit positions of power where they can do such great harm to others? Why do the religious leaders who insisted on this crucifixion do not see the compassion and the power of Jesus and believe that he is the Messiah they've been looking for all along? Why? It's the question that helps us articulate our deep desire to find meaning in meaningless events, to understand and thereby not quite feel so overwhelmed by events that are beyond our control. One writer says that this is just the question that haunts me each time, every year at Easter. Why must Jesus die like this? Why must it end this way? Why the mockery and abuse? Why the nails and the cross? Why, in the end, such a shameful death? Why? Perhaps you recognize this question. It is the distraught cry that we utter when we're confused by our circumstances, when we're outraged by a sense of injustice, or when we're simply feeling out of control. Why did the cancer come back? Why was I chosen to be downsized? Why is my child struggling? Why do I feel so alone? We might be tempted to seek an answer to this question, why? Or we might hear the trust of words from Jesus' own mouth. Jesus cried out in a loud voice, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." And when he had said this, he breathed his last. Here Jesus trusts completely in God, committing himself to God one last time, even if the circumstances are difficult, even if ultimately we don't know why. What we do know forever and what we do know for certain is for whom. We know for whom Jesus hung on that cross. We know that Jesus was on that cross for his mother and faithful follower Mary. And he was on that cross for the women and men that he noticed and saw and had compassion on and healed as he ministered. He was on that cross for his disciples, even if they were not there at that exact moment. He was on that cross for the criminal who wanted to follow him, even though there was no tomorrow in which to do so. He was on that cross for the Roman centurion who realized far too late that he'd participated in crucifying an innocent man. And he was on that cross for the leaders and the soldiers who mocked him and scoffed at him. And he was on that cross for you, and he was on that cross for me. And Voskamp says, if trust must be earned, hasn't God unequivocally earned our trust with the bark on raw wounds, the thorns pressed into the brow, your name on cracked lips? will he not also graciously give us all things that he deems best and right? He's already given us the incomprehensible, Christ our crossbeam. And so let us sit here for a moment at the foot of the cross in the place of all who fled and keeping company with those who stayed, absorbing the compassion and the forgiveness that Jesus offers even to those who have done wrong. And yes, most difficult, even recognizing ourselves and our own guilt in the ones who hurl insults at Jesus. And let us remember above all else, not why he is hanging there, but for whom. As we go today, we're going to share in the table of the Lord. This is another reminder of the reason why God has already earned our trust. One writer says, for Jesus says to his disciples at the very outset of Luke's description of the Passion, when the hour came, he took his place at the table with his disciples and shared one last meal with them. And at that meal, he took bread, gave thanks, broke it, and gave it to them, saying, this is my body, which is given for you. Did you hear that? Those last two words, for you. For the disciples, even as the evangelist records Judas, who betrayed him, Peter, who denied him, and the rest who desert him. And if for these, then also for us. And knowing this makes all the difference. We commend to Almighty God our brother Jesus, and we commit his body to its resting place, earth to earth, ashes to ashes, dust to dust. Let him sleep now, for it is finished. Let us go to the table of the Lord.